This session is Economics for Extemp, what every student should know about economics and prosperity. My name is Rehmke, and I do workshops on the economics of speech and debate topics. So we'll be discussing economic principles and applications to inflation, pandemics, and public health, current issues involving energy trade, labor mobility. The idea is you can get an overview of sort of key economic principles and apply them to a wide range of current events. So I'm the with author of The Complete Idiot's Guide to Global Economics, and I'll be recommending a number of videos that give an introduction to global issues and trade. I'm going to argue there's a number of debates on this topic. I'll just put them all up here. The idea is the pandemic we just went through and the lockdowns and public health issues, those are debates over what we did, what we should have done. Should we have locked down more, locked down less? Debates over the science and the research. That's one whole area. Also, there are debates over inflation. How do we deal with the inflation we've got? And monetary, fiscal, and tax policy. Should taxes be higher, lower? How do we decide or evaluate? We have debates over income and wealth inequality that seems to increase, but poverty levels have gone down. So how do we balance these things? And issues about injustice. We have issues about global inequality between rich countries and poor. Why are people in Latin America and Africa still so much poorer than people in Europe, America, or Japan, northern countries? We have debates over trade and protectionism, supply chain issues, globalization, lots of debates over trade with China and other countries. We have debates over migration and refugee policy. What should we do about illegal immigration? Should we increase the number of refugees we allow in? Or labor mobility, visa debates. We have a whole series of debates on energy and environmental policy, on the reliance on fossil fuels in the coming decades, and the transition to green, to wind and solar. But that's intermittent, so how do we get the batteries or backup systems necessary? Nuclear energy is rapidly developing. Should we look to there? Then we have a huge range of debates over defense and military policy. With Russia, Ukraine, Iran, and China, what should the United States' role be in engaging around the world to, help poor countries or defend or build failed states or help stop failed states? And this has been ongoing since Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine, as well as Syria and Iran. So lots to discuss, but again, some economic principles I think will be very helpful. I'm going to recommend the Foundation for Economic Education has an economics and government program where they're going over their workshop goes over not only the philosophical principles of trade and international commerce, but also the ideas of how economists look at these, which tend to be the same across an ideological spectrum. Most economists, for example, argue for increased trade and deeper engagements and investments across countries. Also, there's looking at these topics, a post by Joshua Anamulu on steel manning. And this is the idea that when you're either in extemp or in debate, you want to try and fairly state different sides of the debate. You want to don't put up a straw man and knock it down. You want to make the other side of the argument look as strong as possible. And then once you can restate the arguments, so for example, for protectionism or against increased immigration, then you can advocate or explain arguments for trade or for increased migration. So the idea is to show the judges that you understand the different sides of the argument, and though you're taking a position, let's say, in a persuasive debate, you understand why people would disagree or be skeptical. Debate is a kind of mind training. It's allowing you to see different sides of history, economics, and government. And the argument that Robert Laton makes in his book, Resolved, is that debate can revolutionize education and help save our democracy. He argues that every high school class should be taught as a debate class. American history, world history are full of debates over the way things happened and the way they should have happened. Critics say, who are the good guys and the bad guys? And being able to stand up and state different sides of the position fairly would help us today get past this sort of ideological divide where people can't even seem to hear opposing positions, much less be able to restate them thoughtfully. So in the background of this is an ongoing debate about market and command economies. How should social systems be organized? How should people live together? Now, in the family, each family makes its own decisions about how the family's going to be managed and who's going to do what. And those are issues like in a small community or a village where people know each other and there's exchanges and gifts and decisions in the family. In fact, families, you could argue, sort of follow a socialist conception as from each according to their ability to each according to their need. I mean, that's the way you raise kids and try to find justice in the family. But for an extended economy where thousands, millions of people interact that don't know each other, that's where markets come in. And so getting a sense of what the market process is critical. And then there's also command economies where big economies they try to run them through commands, top down. The Politburo decides, or the Federal Food and Drug Administration tries to decide which drugs should be marketed and which ones not, and what counts as evidence. So top down, command economy, market economies are sort of bottom up. And in the real world, all the economies are mixed. Part of the United States, Social Security, the FDA, Commerce Department, much of education are government run or government managed or government funded, and much of the economy, the drug industry, the food industry, are privately run by individuals, small companies, big corporations. And it's a mixture. Companies and government work together, so sometimes called crony capitalism, or negative words where lots of special interest groups impact the decisions that governments make. But we want to understand, I think, or students should understand, property rights, investment decisions, labor policies. Ideally, we have a system for free and flourishing individuals and families where people can make their own decisions. And there's a set of rules of the game that apply fairly to everyone. And economists argue property rights, investment, labor policies involve markets and contracts and legal institutions. And we'll talk more about those. Lester Thoreau, economist more on the left, I think, makes the comment that the problem with socialism is that no one knows who should stay up with a sick cow. And in a market economy, it's the owner of the cow who stays up, who has the incentives to protect their owned resources. In a communal economy, a giant agricultural co-op that the Soviet Union used to run, or in China, they didn't produce very much food. There were real problems with incentives and information in those systems. So much of economics is about incentive problems and information problems. Who has the incentive to solve problems? And where do you have the information about how problems should be solved? And often it's local. The people that have information about, managing a farm tend to be the farmers on that farm, not bureaucrats at the Department of Agriculture or working for the European Union. The pamphlet iPencil by Leonard Read that the Foundation for Economic Education offers in pamphlet form and online is just the story of a pencil. It's how the fact that knowledge is decentralized in our economy and that nobody in the world knows how to make a pencil, that knowledge is spread throughout the world, the different technologies involved in pencil production. And that's the same with iPhones and every other gadget or device, even, lumber, somebody knows how to cut the lumber, somebody knows how to grow the tree. Knowledge is divided, and we benefit from knowledge we don't have through the market economy that organizes this knowledge. So if you were to look at the basics of economics, if you've taken an economics course, it often starts with the discussion of scarcity. There's not enough of everything for everyone. So there's got to be a system where we can decide as individuals, we have a scarce amount of money. We don't have all the money we want. We don't have all the time. We've got to decide what we want to use our scarce resources to buy, what we want to buy. We prioritize. And that's a decision about what to consume. And similarly for companies, for enterprises, they have to prioritize what they produce, how much of what they produce. And so these decisions made by the consumers and the producers, the question is what coordinates that, organizes that. But scarcity leads to choices, And every choice has an opportunity cost. When we decide to go to a movie, the cost of that movie is not just the money cost, it's the time. So you could have been spending that time, researching for your next tournament, for your extemp rounds or debate. The money you could have been using to buy a book or buy resources or spend for an online subscription to The Economist or the New York Times. So your money, your time is limited. Even Bill Gates or Elon Musk, they have lots of money, but they don't have lots of time. They've got the same 24 hours. Every choice they make has a cost. We call that an opportunity cost. And it's the same with government spending. Every dollar the government spends is money they could have spent elsewhere, plus money, if they didn't tax it from consumers or borrow it, would be available for the taxpayers or future taxpayers that pay off the loans. So when we buy something, the true cost is the opportunity cost. We make choices between work and leisure, whether we should, have fun and run around and play outside, or whether we should work and earn money. So when you combine the decisions made by producers and consumers, we have basically the supply and demand of goods and services, and those are coordinated by prices and by markets, which send signals out and coordinate people's decisions as they see the price go up. Like the price of oil goes up, more companies begin to increase oil production. When we talk about economics, there's different categories of economics that you study in an econ class: macroeconomics, big stuff, microeconomics, the theory of the firm or the family. Then there's development economics, which is how poor countries can develop and prosper. Economic history is sort of looking in the past to see how economies in the past prospered. How did, Holland and England and Scotland that used to be poor become prosperous? Then there's monetary economics, the decisions about what kind of money and who decides the money supply and definitions. And then there's public choice theory, which is economic principles applied to collective action, to government action. And in a sense, governments follow the same constraints that the private sector does when senators or congressmen decide how they're going to spend, your money or what they're going to do with their time in terms of legislation. So, lots of debate topics we talked about. I do workshops on the economics of debate topics. This one's on a topic on trade policy, import-export reform. And we use some resources from the Foundation for Economic Education on that. Another topic has to do with U.S.-European policy, and we look at fossil fuels and debates over energy and debt. And then, as I mentioned, income inequality issues. So I think in the background of all this, sort of the big picture is we'd like the world to flourish. It's great that Americans have lots of money compared to our ancestors in terms of food and housing and clothing. We'd like everybody to have enough. But people in the developing world, in Latin America, India, Africa, are far, far poorer than we are. And so one question is what will bring them to prosperity? But the second, looking back just over the last 40 years, we have an astonishing story of a dramatic decrease in poverty around the world, of absolute poverty. So, for example, in 1990, there's 1.85 billion people that are earning less than $2 a day, according to the World Bank, and those are inflation-adjusted numbers. By 2017, that falls over 1 billion people to 689 million, and that's at the same time that the world population grew by 2 billion. So economists argue, using this red line, that it was increase in economic freedom, the collapse of communism in the Soviet Union and communist China and Eastern Europe and deregulation in India and United States and Europe. The argument is that increase in economic freedom made it easier for companies to start, to grow, to hire people, for technology developments to increase productivity. And so the argument is we've had tremendous progress at this time because of movements toward economic freedom. So this is it's an ideological claim in a sense that we should have, less regulation, lower taxes, more trade. But here they're making an empirical claim. They're saying let's measure levels of economic freedom across countries, and then let's see what happens with the idea that a country deregulates like Peru did or like Chile did, that their prosperity will increase and their citizens become more wealthier over time. So how do we measure this? There's the Economic Freedom of the World report. That's the Fraser Institute and 30 or 40 other think tanks that are trying to measure economic freedom across the world. A competitive report is the Index of Economic Freedom that the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal do. And in each of these, they're trying to measure freedom on a whole bunch of different levels, on business freedom, on fiscal health, on tax reform, on judicial transparency. And for extempers, I'm going to argue that you become familiar with these indexes as well as critiques of the indexes. And when you get a topic about a country maybe you're not familiar with, you can immediately open to the information about that country that has a brief overview and then a story of economic reforms and whether that country is getting more prosperous or less prosperous, and the link that is to the economy. So I recommend those as resources for speech and debate students. Here I show a video from the John Templeton Foundation on the beginning minutes of globalization at the crossroads. I'm going to skip over it here, but you can follow this link, freetochoosenetwork.org, and watch the beginning yourself. And in this, Hernando de Soto makes the argument that in much of the developing world, people don't have access to what we take for granted. Property rights, land titling, rule of law institutions, and he calls these the economic oxygen that allows societies to function. And much of this just isn't, poor people don't have access to the formal legal systems in much of the world, and that's the case Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto is making in his books and in this documentary that's again online at the link. So again, I'm skipping through it. Another index is the Human Freedom Index, which is a global measure of personal, civil, and economic freedom, sort of broader than just the Economic Freedom Index. That's the Cato Institute does that, which is a free market or libertarian think tank. In addition, there's the very important Ease of Doing Business Index that the World Bank for years did, and the ease of this is more about that. The World Bank actually stopped doing it under pressure, I think, from China, but they discontinued it. But for the 15 years it was in process, it focused on how hard it was for an everyday person to just start a company, to get a permit, to start a company. Did they have to wait years for a permit? Was it only rich people could start companies? Enterprises, and this is very important according to this article in Real Clear Markets, which is a pro-market website. So this one at Dignity Unbound is a path to prosperity in India that looks at the Ease of Doing Business Index. For example, in India, to start a business, an entrepreneur had to have put in a huge amount of money, 111% of annual income before they could even register a business. And you might say, well, that will help them survive instead of going bankrupt, 2 months into the business. But that's an obstacle. That's putting the lower rung of the ladder way high for somebody opening a restaurant or a food truck or something else. So that set of arguments, either in America, in the inner city, in the developing world, how hard is it for somebody with an idea to start a business and try and produce goods and services for customers and make money? This is another one, the Center for Civil Society, and there's a link there that you should be able to click that on the PDF. This had to do with the regulations in India restricted people using bamboo because they restricted cutting trees. But the argument one entrepreneur made is, well, bamboo's not a tree, it's a grass. So therefore, those regulations don't apply. That sounds crazy, but these are the sort of battles people have to go through around the world to just get started. And economists say that's one of the reasons there's so much more prosperity in America and Europe, and why some states are doing better than others, because it's easier to start businesses in some U.S. states compared to others. So this brings us up to date, looking at the pandemic, and though there was tremendous benefits, there was a downturn because of the pandemic. But here's an interesting story about global poverty. In the 1960s, the incomes in Latin America of everyday people on average were higher than all of people in Asia, Southeast Asia in particular. And by the time 2000, it's completely reversed. The Asian tigers, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, and Hong Kong went from, the developing world where their incomes were the same as Ghana and Nigeria and India and just took off. What happened? Well, economists say it was mercantilism in Latin America. To start anything, you needed permission from the government. 500 years of mercantilism following the old systems in Spain and Portugal made it much harder for economic development in Latin America. So again, world population goes up dramatically over 30 years, 2 billion more people, and yet over 1 billion fewer in absolute poverty. And that's not to say, over $1.9 a day is fantastic. It's progress, but we want people to have more prosperity. And how do we get from here to there? And that's really the question. This is a